When it comes to a war with the US, how well would Beijing be able to use all that stuff? The real question seems pretty simple. Yes, China is certainly developing all the military and technology goodies to field a potent force. However, how well can it operate all that equipment in the pressure-filled situation of a war? Sure, Beijing is certainly developing a world-class military, but can its soldiers operate all that equipment competently? Just how well trained are they? You can have the best military in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, well, you get the idea. Let's not mince words, a US-China war would be hell on earth. It would likely start World War III. Millions, maybe billions, of people would die if nuclear weapons were ever used in such a conflict. The global economy would likely face ruin. That's what happens when the world's biggest economic powers start shooting at each other. Thankfully, the chances are remote it will ever happen. Yet, the threat of such a conflict remains thanks to the many different pressure points in the US-China relationship. Forget the challenge of ISIS, Ukraine, Syria, or whatever the flavor of the moment is. The US-China relationship, and whether it remains peaceful or not, is the most important challenge of our time. Period. Thanks to over 20 years of large-scale investments, the PRC has gone from being a third-rate military that could project very little offensive punch to arguably the second most powerful military machine on the planet. And with an emphasis on weapons systems that embrace anti-access area denial military doctrine, a 2AD, China seems to be developing the tools it needs if war with America did ever come to pass. Beijing's motto these days, be prepared. The challenges China would face against the US in a conflict, but in a very broad, top-down, and practical sort of way. While Beijing certainly has the tools to get the job done when it comes to a war with Washington, the challenges China would face in such a conflict would be immense, and many of them could be quite basic. The PRC would be going to war against the premier military power on the planet, some would argue the most lethal fighting machine of all time. In this essay we will review some of the important foundational reasons why many argue, quite convincingly, that the US would very well defeat China in a war. Yes, Beijing keeps cranking out those whiz-bang high-tech weapons of war like sausages. China has those shiny, new carrier killer missiles that everyone is always fretting about, including yours truly. It's building aircraft carriers, fifth-generation fighters, multiple types of cruise missiles, nuclear and ultra-quiet diesel submarines, drones, mines, and so on. It all looks really good, at least on paper. When it comes to a war with the US, how well would Beijing be able to use all that stuff? The real question seems pretty simple. Yes, China is certainly developing all the military and technology goodies to field a potent force. However, how well can it operate all that equipment in the pressure-filled situation of a war? Sure, Beijing is certainly developing a world-class military, but can its soldiers operate all that equipment competently? Just how well trained are they? You can have the best military in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, well, you get the idea. So how much would the above impact the much-needed rapid reaction time essential to make quick decisions once the bombs begin to drop in a war with America? Is China up to the challenge? The idea of the PLA being a party army is a very important reality. What does this all mean in a war with America? Your guess is as good as mine. There is no better way to make a modern military even more deadly than to fight jointly. Sharing intelligence and waging war by coordinating your forces across multiple domains, think air, sea, space, cyber and land, is the best way to achieve hard-fought military objectives and is the ultimate force multiplier. It is something America and many other great powers are putting a lot of time, energy and resources into. China is also working towards such a goal. And while sources vary on how well Beijing could wage a major joint operation against a determined foe, especially against the US, many have their doubts. In a recent report by the RAND Corporation titled China's Incomplete Military Modernization, the authors have some serious doubts when it comes to Beijing's joint warfighting capabilities. Many Chinese strategists identify the inability to conduct integrated joint operations at the desired level of competence as the central problem China faces as it aspires to project combat power beyond its land borders. Indeed, Chinese sources highlight several problems that contribute to the PLA's shortcomings in the area of joint operations and suggest that there is still a large gap between China and developed countries' militaries, especially the United States. In the same paragraph, the authors of the study also discuss issues with training, reinforcing my earlier point. PLA publications also highlight continuing shortfalls in training, despite years of effort to make training more realistic and more valuable in terms of addressing shortcomings and improving the PLA's operational capabilities. In addition, The publications point to persistent challenges in combat support and combat service support functions and forces, as reflected by frequent discussions of shortcomings in logistics and maintenance capabilities that appear in PLA newspaper reports and journal articles. When it comes to military technology, keeping ahead of the curve is key. America seems to crank out new defense tech all the time. The question over the long term for China will be how well it can keep up in the tech game. Specifically, can Beijing develop advanced military systems indigenously? This might be the biggest challenge for China when we look out over the long term, 10 to 20 years in the future, in a conflict with America. We all know China has a great track record of, well, permanently borrowing the designs of many of the world's best combat systems. However, one can only gain so much by playing copycat. Even a copy needs to be reverse engineered, and sometimes that isn't easy. A poor copy would do China no good on the battlefield. Over the next decade, Beijing will need to develop ingeniously many of the world's most sought-after pieces of military hardware and other intricate systems that make them go, things like jet engines, that are not easy to produce with precision and that they currently struggle with. China will also need to get good at maintaining and improving world-class equipment under the worst of conditions. While it might not be sexy, innovation and keeping ahead of the curve would pay dividends in a war against America when we look out over the long term. Only time will tell if Beijing is up to the challenge. The last time China fought a major war was 1979. The best way to get good at anything is to actually go out and do it a lot. The challenge for China is that you can wargame all you want, but unless you have experienced actual combat there will always be a learning curve. And the curve for China is steep. Beijing has not fought a major war since its roughly 1-month skirmish with Vietnam in 1979. Now, while knowledge from a conflict 35 years ago might not translate into success against America in a war, having little to no combat experience could pose some challenges for China. Washington going into any conflict with Beijing would certainly have a decisive advantage when it comes to war fighting. While the conflicts America has fought over the last 25 years were not A2AD battle royals, the last few decades has offered the US military the capability to test out new systems and tactics, fix things that aren't working when it comes to combat operations, and make important adjustments for future scenarios. For example, the US did not need to send F-22s into Syria. However, the opportunity to learn on the battlefield and gain experience is of vital importance and likely the main reason for doing so. And it is one area that would have to be considered a major advantage in a battle against China. Sometimes the best way to approach a problem is to look at it from multiple angles, not just from your typical scenario of move, counter-move. What are the actual weaknesses of the different players when it comes to effectively waging war against a modern and determined foe on a practical level? The above demonstrates not only some of the basic challenges China would have over the short and long term in a fight with America, but also clearly illustrates a much greater dilemma, creating a military that, at least on paper, can take on America. That isn't to say China couldn't do it, for I am on record that Beijing could do incredible damage to American and Allied forces in a fight, and maybe even win depending on the situation. What I am saying, America has one heck of a head start in such a contest.